Hello and welcome to a special episode of AI Pro Plus here on Anfield Index. I'm Eddie Gibbs, and today I'm delighted to be joined by a special guest, a bona fide pioneer of fan media and someone I'm sure you've heard speaking about Liverpool FC at various points over many years, but also someone remarkably who I think is making his debut here on Anfield Index today. He is the unmistakable voice of the Anfield Wrap, and he's recently released a new book, Transformer, Klopp, The Revolution of a Club and Culture. Neil Atkinson, welcome to Anfield Index. It's delighted to finally have you here.
That's very kind indeed. Thanks for having me on, Eddie, to talk about the book.
Great. It's been something that I thought we were recording this last Thursday. I got my dates mixed up and I hadn't started the book last Thursday. I have now. And of course the audiobook, it's not like the normal audiobook. I listen to a lot of audiobooks because I walk my dog for miles and miles each week. And one of the things I noticed with your book is that you almost do a mini podcast at the start of the book, the audiobook, which is obviously something that's not there in the written book, but it's there on the audiobook. And I don't think I've ever heard anyone do that before. So what was your thinking with that?
First and foremost, to give myself permission to make mistakes. It was, honestly, so I talking for a living, which is one thing it's fair to sort of describe as what I do, I like to think I'm at least pretty good at it. And then reading something out was so remarkably hard. It took ages. Andy produced and edited it, and the number of times he'll have just had in a text some sort of random dropped in expletive, followed by "sorry about that," and followed by, and then he had to sort of mash it all together. And I'm sure that's what normally happens, but it happens even, every now and again. Someone will say, "We just need you to read this." They'll send me down to the studio, "Just read this," and I'll go, "Okay." And it'll take me, genuinely, it'll be like a one paragraph bit of text. And it'll take me about 15 minutes, and then I'll come back up and I'll go, "There we are, that's done." Now they say, what were you doing? And it's a funny thing added to that, reading your own writing, because, there's one hellish thing, which is that when you're reading a paragraph and your eye realises there's a typo at the end of it, and you're reading it from the published book, that's a oh God moment and a half. But also the idea of you just sort of go, why have I put that? That's a really, why that was. You don't say that. That's ridiculous. Your mouth just rebels against it. You come up with something more elegant, and then suddenly I've got that in there, and things like that, and then drive myself a bit mad. So what I thought was, right, I need to have some asides in this, so I can sort of bring the listener with me on every now and again. This is not, it's very close to the actual words that are written down. When I say very close, I mean like 99.1% or probably something like that, probably. But it allowed me every now and again to sort of say, listen, now that I'm reading this, what I really meant was, and giving myself permission to do that and bring the listener along was one of the key sort of aspects of it. And also just for my own sanity, really, just to sort of enjoy it a little bit more and make it a little bit different, because things being the same over and over again is something that just drives you a bit mad.
One of the things you mentioned in the opening that really resonated with me, and I don't suppose it will with everyone that was reading the book, but you mentioned that the Anfield Wrap was very much a part business, part fan club, part everything. You broke it down really well, and I think that's something I'd never really contemplated before. But for us, obviously, that's very similar as well in what I do every day, and it was kind of an interesting one. That, and I thought, what do you think will resonate most with people about that? Where do you think we are as fan media now in terms of fan club business? How do we keep that? How do we keep that balance?
Community project as well, on all the other bits and pieces, voice for people, and then an opportunity for people to develop themselves. I think all of these things are valid processes through what's done in the space, and I think that the balance. I think the balance is something that I fret about. I think, and also I don't think there's a definitive answer. One, I don't think there's a definitive answer, sort of organisation by organisation. But two, I almost think the organisations themselves need to be able to flex and shift. So a really good example is, we did a lot of stuff in the aftermath of what went on in Paris. And that basically became a lot of the business's focus and flow for 10 days, 2 weeks, and then was often returned to. But at no point, and by the way, we shouldn't have done, but at no point did we sort of make that part of the monetised offer, in inverted commas. It was just simply something we were here to do, able to do. The location helped. The fact that people could just come in. The fact that, all it takes is for someone to come in. I can switch a microphone on, record them, and we're on. We're going, and then someone can say something. So, that was, I think, that's an example of, all the way through the back end of that season, we want to be tell the story of the fantastic year in 21-22 under Jürgen Klopp. We want to do that. We also want to get subscribers. And as you know, big wins and transfers lead to subscribers and engagement. It's as simple as that. There's no other formula for this anymore. Nothing else leads to subscribers. It is just big wins and transfers. So you're in this situation where that's happening, all that's happening, that's been going on, and we've been very much like, okay, let's encourage people to turn around, come subscribe. And then Paris happens, and it becomes, right, that's just completely finished. And it's not because of the results, but because of everything else. It's not even then, we're not even looking really at the idea of a summer of recruitment or anything like that for the first 2 or 3 weeks of that summer. The focus goes on the other thing. So my point is that even wherever you think you've got the answer for where your lines are and what you're doing and what the target is and what's the overall ethos, it shifts. And for us, the thing that we want to do is sort of has been, and it's within the book, it's sort of tell the story of supporting Liverpool. It's not tell the story of Liverpool. The book is not telling the story of Jürgen Klopp. It's not a biography. It doesn't start with Jürgen Klopp was born on this date and then move all the way through. It doesn't do that. It's instead the idea of what we get through the prism of Klopp. Similarly, what we're trying to do is get things through the prism of supporting Liverpool. And I think that it is a difficult thing, and I don't think there is one answer. And I think it's and also that's why you shouldn't, even though you will fret, and I'm sure you do personally, and people will sometimes think we're getting it wrong, both you and I, or in other ways. And they might have a point. It's important to say that, but also what's the answer on Monday might not be the answer by Friday, which may not be the answer by 3 weeks hence. It's not quite as dramatic as that most of the time, but you are sort of trying to draw the lines between that. And also, let's not over dramatize this. There'll be other businesses knocking around that are nowhere near the sort of sector that we exist in, where they may think, well, a massive part of what we want to do is personal development for people. So where do we draw the line there around one aspect of the needs versus we really believe culturally in development of people? There's lots of things that exist in the space between entrepreneurship and volunteer work. There's loads of things that exist in this space. So it's important not to just sort of get hung up and act as though your challenge is unique. Well, your challenge is still your challenge, and you can learn from a lot of what goes on. But as I say, I think that the worst thing you can do is drive yourself mad hunting for the answer, because I just don't think there is one.
Yeah, it's summed up perfectly. That's exactly, I'd agree with every word of that. Now, you mentioned in a recent interview, I did listen to 2 interviews that you did about the book. You did one with Josh Williams on his Distance Covered podcast, and of course you did a video one with John Gibbs for the Anfield Wrap as well. Now, in that book, you mentioned that you only finished it during Liverpool's pre-season tour in the USA, and that's just a few weeks, obviously, before your publisher deadline. So could you tell us what the rush was like to complete the book? Did the time pressure affect how you structured the final chapters? Or did it change how you reflected on Klopp's announcement to step away, given that it was so recent? I mean, it baggles my mind that you could be finishing this book just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, the oddest thing was actually finishing a lot of the text around the time that the final games were still happening. So I write after every match. So the thing I wrote after Wolves is pretty close to the final chapter that's in the book.
Right.
Because I was conscious I was writing the final chapter of the book. In that moment when I was right, I thought, let's just capture this the way in which it feels at that moment as he steps away from the pitch. Let's just literally do that as I normally do with the post-match writing. But also then we're going to use this. This is going to be in there. It's going to drop in at the end, and things like that did influence the writing of the book. I didn't like the feelings of a settling nostalgia for something that hadn't even been lost at the point at which Klopp was winding down by that stage. I think it would have been a different energy if they'd have got results against Palace and Manchester United. I think that the energy around it all would have perpetuated, and that idea of a pining for something would never have quite emerged. But it did, because the results went the way in which they did go. And then I think from there, I was just a little, what the best way to sort of describe it is thinking, no, this is actually counter, because I was in the book, I was thinking this is actually counter to a lot of what he's argued for and stated and wanted all the way through. He doesn't want, he almost just doesn't want a statue. He doesn't want that moment of being frozen. He instead wants to feel as though he's contributed to a living thing that he hands on. And then, because he is who he is, he absolutely nails that moment when he's on the pitch after the Wolves game. He absolutely nails it in the purest possible sense. So that does influence the writing of the book a little bit, but that was, because of the when and as it was written. and then tidying it sort of over the course of finishing it and then tidying it over the course of the summer did lead to me genuinely sort of at 2 a.m. doing the final edits and the final lines and the final sort of copy reads and then the final bits and pieces over in the US and changing a little bit here, cut that paragraph there, let that go. We don't need that, I don't think. Maybe we do need to add this. It does, obviously, it's therefore quite a contemporaneous piece of work. It might be that, I don't think it would be, but it might be that in 5 years' time, I might have chosen to approach the task a little bit differently. But as it was, because there was, I'd like to think not, because I think that's one of the main things to take from the Klopp era. It's why I put the timeline in and make the argument all the way through. He packs, they pack, he packs, we pack an awful lot into 9 years. That 9 years of Liverpool feels like 20 of anything else. And that was also, and still is, how the world itself operates in that period. You have there's an old line that you have decades where nothing happens and weeks where everything does. But in that period as well, in the wider world, there's definitely a sense of an acceleration of events. So all of that leads to, I think, the feeling that the book has to have a sense of sort of vitality about it. It has to have a sense of sort of being in the moment about it, to understand what it was that he was doing, because all he was doing was slowly but surely, at least up until sort of 2020, but I would argue still after then, slowly but surely just turning a screw in terms of our own intensity, but also the intensity of our experience supporting Liverpool over that period, whilst the world was doing it to us as well.
Yeah, that was quite something, actually. It's something I've just finished in the audiobook is you do read a timeline quite near the start of the book, and it's obviously not just the Liverpool things, and it's not just the Liverpool milestones, it's global milestones as well. And it was quite a paradox hearing it that way, because your brain plays tricks on you, you know what I mean? You do not believe that these things have happened in the order that you mentioned them. It absolutely blew my mind that some of these real life events happened at the same time that some of these Liverpool things were happening. And it's not just the Liverpool timeline that's muddled, it's the global timeline that's muddled. And then when you merge the two together, your head just explodes.
And that's what we were all going through. And there's 3 timelines in the book. There's one up to the pandemic. Then the half-time section of the book deals with the pandemic period. And then the second half section of the book deals with the time from effectively the start of the 21-22 season all the way through until the day he goes, and sort of doing those timelines. So I first and foremost sort of started working on them just for me, in terms of.
Oh, really?
So the timeline goes through 2 steps really. One is I started working on it just for me, and then I thought, hang on. And also, it occurred to me you could play with it and have fun with it in terms of mixing and meshing these events, but also it gives you room to tell some jokes and to do all that sort of thing in a way that I quite like jokes in a list format. But then the first version of the book, the first draft, had the timeline from 2015 all the way through until 2024 up the top. And the editor and publisher sort of pointed out it would mean the first effectively 100 pages of the book was just a timeline. And we all felt that wasn't quite right. So then that's part of the process of then, I'd already sort of broken the book into at least a sense of both theme and also flow of time. I wanted there to be a bit of sort of a genuine linear chronology within it. So therefore that then separates into the idea, well, okay, if we say, pre-match analysis, or warm up, first half, half time, second half, post match analysis as the conclusion, warm up as the idea of getting into the flow of what was, then we break the timeline then into those 3 chunks, and that then lays out sort of what happens. And also oddly, it had not occurred to me before doing it. It does actually give it a real sense of symmetry, which I think that the period, it hadn't really occurred to me, as I say, until I sort of addressed it in that form in the book and started to write this timeline of things out to work out what I wanted to pick out and focus on. But it does have a sort of genuine sense of symmetry and a genuine sense of narrative flow, which I think is useful when you're writing a book, to suddenly be given the gift of something like that when it drops in front of your eyes. So yeah, that was why we addressed that. And as I say as well, the other good thing about the timeline was you really got to enjoy it. Therefore, also it gave the opportunity to write about games that, having put 19 key games in, to write about games that were not key games, but which obviously have an immediate resonance and significance. He breaks his glasses at Norwich, the Origi goal against Everton. All these things that are in there you just to sort of pull them back through a little bit and allow them a paragraph to breathe without needing to contextualise them, because there's no real context. The Norwich one's a really good example, actually. There's no real context around Norwich away, the 5-4, in that the season's just sort of, at that point, potter along. I couldn't tell you what the game was before or the game after. And then suddenly we're on the telly playing this mad match in Norwich, and it tells you loads about the manager, loads about a couple of his players, loads even about the signing of Stephen Colker. But it doesn't mean anything in the grand scheme of things, other than another thing that made us sort of go, this could be a bit special. So, all of that sort of stuff, I think being able to drop that in really helped.
Excellent. The title, Transformer. I've heard you describe how Klopp didn't have to build everything from scratch. He transformed what we already had, both in terms of the squad and the city. Could you elaborate on what you mean by that? What were the ingredients already in place at Liverpool that Klopp was able to transform?
I mean, first there's the existing players who go on much of the journey with him. It's worth pointing that out in the most basic way. He turns up and Pep Landers is already there as a manager, so as a coach, and he goes away and he comes back, but he's already there. You've got the players who are already there. You've got some of the executives who were going to be sort of part of that process, and there'll be other people behind the scenes as well. So if we sort of see Liverpool just as that separate thing, there's some that needed to go. But what he also has is not dissimilar to when Shankly turns up, he leaves Huddersfield, comes to Liverpool, and one of the reasons why is he's just absolutely convinced that if you make it big in Liverpool, you can make it absolutely massive. And Klopp, in a much more 21st century way, is on a similar trajectory really with Liverpool. He's made it big in Dortmund. He's did what he did at Mainz, makes it big in Dortmund, but realises when the offer comes from Liverpool that there is, because of Liverpool's history and because of its resonance and because of its global significance as a football club, which I think we do sometimes miss. I genuinely do think we underplay, and I think that we underplay it as supporters at times, because I think we like the idea that we're plucky underdogs, and I think it's underplayed at times, I think, by the club out of convenience to act as though, well, we're only plucky underdogs, whereas the truth is that prior to Klopp coming, but also just in general, when Liverpool cut a swathe across Europe, and Liverpool's cut a series of swathes across Europe, to use that language, there's the sort of the Shankly into Paisley era of Liverpool looking like a phenomenal European team. Obviously that's curtailed by what happens in Heysel. Then when Houllier gets in charge of the club, Liverpool cuts a swathe across Europe again there for a period, which arguably ends with the final in 2007, when we sadly in Athens that day we don't win. There's then another couple of sort of quarterfinals in there, but what, again, the way time plays tricks is that, 2007 to 2015 is 8 years. 8 years. Whereas because a lot of the aspects that had gone on during those 8 years, the collapse of the club in the context of Hicks and Gillette and the end of Benitez, followed by the punishment of Hodgson, followed by the redemption with Dalglish, which then led into Kenny not quite being able to get it done in that second season, which then got us the early part of Rodgers where no one quite knew what was going on, then the mid part of Rodgers when it was unbelievably heady, and then the end of Rodgers when it fell apart around him. Again, that all felt, in part because maybe it was also the boom of an online era, that all felt like there was just a lot. But also it felt like, well, that was, therefore, 2007, ages ago, ages, planet, different world. Whereas I think from the outside, and I think across the continent, everyone is just always waiting for Liverpool. What are Liverpool going to do? What are Liverpool? And we missed that. So Jürgen knew that, and he knew he could transform all of that. And then as part of that, there's us as well. It doesn't take much. 13-14 is an example of it, but it doesn't take much. Istanbul season's an example of it to get us back in the groove. And we're there, we're constantly there. His language, which he used at the very start, doubters into believers, and at the very end said, that's an active change. I can't do that. I can create the circumstances to do that, but you've got to do it. And the truth is, at our best, we're, and I mean this in genuinely I think it's the best thing in football, we're easily convinced. We want to be convinced. We believe it's our right as Liverpool supporters to be convinced, because it's their right as Liverpool players to cut a swathe, to win, to pin the continent back by its ears, to challenge. Like, we believe inherently that is always just around the corner, unless we manage to really sort of twist ourselves up. So that's there as well. But then the other things that were there was the city itself had undergone significant change. after the capital culture. So that's different. And it was waiting for something to sort of galvanise around. And there's been some Evertonians who are quite annoyed when I say, about the transformation of the city and Klopp's part in that, because they say it's only half the city, but they're wrong. They're wrong, because they actually have had aspects of the benefits of that with reference to what's changed with the nighttime economy, the boom in the hotels. All of that stuff needs the football, and it needs the football to be successful, and I'd argue it needs the football to be European. And then there's people like you and me, where there's a situation where ultimately we were doing what we were doing, and we were doing it well, but you were waiting for the thing that everyone wraps around. And the best example of that, which Sean O'Donnell mentions in Dan Morgan's excellent book about Klopp, is it's what happens in Shevchenko Park, which is, it was like people came from all over, but the commitment that was made, that was there, the trust from the club towards the people who were on the stages and doing stuff that day, the way in which everyone pulled together and worked together was, well, we make the most of this at every opportunity from now on. That's it. That's the thing we've agreed. We absolutely wring the joy out of every single moment. So all of that comes together. And as I keep saying, Klopp was never in Shevchenko Park. He probably didn't even know it was happening until afterwards, when he'll have seen the videos and people have shown him the videos. But he's had no part in it. But he's had a huge part in it, in part getting the club to the final, but also changing the weather around everything. And, making everyone feel part of it, and understanding how everyone needs to be part of it. And so I think, all of that is a transformative act. But none of it, very little of it, is an act of pure creation. And I think that's the important part here. And that's what I think he himself would say.
Yeah, quite a brilliant answer. And you've touched on a little bit of my next question there, which I knew you would actually at some point. I thought this would happen. I was going to say that podcasting actually, both with the Anfield Wrap and with Anfield Index, predates Jürgen Klopp. Obviously, that's something to say. But in moments of rare reflection, and I did this when I started listening to your book as well, I often wonder how different Anfield Index would be if Jürgen Klopp hadn't become the Liverpool manager in 2015. And your book kind of made me think about that again. It's not something I've thought too much about, really, but I did get my brain racing a little bit in the past week. And I know you've interviewed him a few times, and obviously you've done some incredible pieces with him. But how much do you think Jürgen has been a part of the success in the Anfield Wrap? How much of a part has he really played?
I think it's a significant part, because, I think that success is a good thing. I think you've got a couple of options. I would not want to be part of something which talked Liverpool down and was clicked on by opposition supporters as something to laugh at. And, I would not enjoy that. I always say, very like going to the game and speaking to the people around the game, and those people want to be represented insofar as there's any form of representation, let's be clear, because there doesn't have to be any, but people don't want to be badly represented, let's be clear. They don't want to feel as though there's people out there who are bad representatives. So I think that's important. But that's obviously easier if they're winning. I say in the book, winning helps. And I think winning helps everyone. Winning helps the city. They've got 8 Champions League in the most basic way. There's 8 Champions League games this year. If Liverpool had come 9th last year, there'd be 0 Champions League games. So there's 4 opportunities for people to come in from abroad and for people to come to the city who support Liverpool. So it's 4 more opportunities for the city to economically boom. Let's say they get out of that, then they're into the last 16. There's another game, and then there's the idea of travelling away, and it's good for those places that we go to as well, that we get that, and then you just also follow it through, and then you get all the way to the final, and there could be an event in the Echo Arena. That's good for the Echo Arena. In the most basic way, winning helps, and everything that goes on around football. And this is, within the book, I've got a line in there where I say, I think I'm good at what I do, and you're the same. But let's be clear, if we grow up Doncaster Rovers fans, no one cares. Doesn't matter. We're doing other things. And we might still be working in an area that's adjacent to this, possibly, but we wouldn't be working in this area because no one cares. So that's A, look. But it's also, I think, B, suggestive of the idea that football is I think football is a Liverpool civic city export project. Like, it genuinely is part of something which exports. And, within that then, as I argue in the book, that then throws other things open. We talk a lot about how football should or shouldn't be. But one of the things that gets missed when people talk talk about any threatened changes to the current settlements is what the current settlement takes away. So I'll use an example in the book, but it's one I genuinely believe in, and as I've argued for years, if LFC TV could screen the 3 p.m. kickoffs, then we'd have a situation where I think LFC TV would pull in markedly more revenue. Some of that revenue would be siphoned off to pay for other things at Liverpool Football Club, but some of it would be to make the best possible version of LFC TV that people can watch all year round. So then more money's going into that, which means that there's more people working in that, which means that there's more young people with media opportunities in Liverpool city centre, either people who live here already or have come here for university and stayed. But that's never even discussed. Now, when people say, oh, it doesn't even come up because the 3 p.m. blackout's its own thing and it's got this monolithic status. But in a way, the city of Liverpool's given that up. The city of Liverpool's given that up. If we think actually about the collective bargaining agreements that the Premier League does, but we're honest, and we say the vast majority of people, not the vast majority, but that ultimately Liverpool and Manchester United are significantly more important to the success of the Premier League and to the money it's therefore able to get in a national and global sense. But Liverpool and Manchester United are both part of a collective bargaining agreement. Well, Liverpool's given that up. No one's asking in other sectors for it to be more generously passed out around the country. Now, I agree with the collective bargaining agreement, I really do. But there are times when I just quite like someone who looks after the mainstream to say, but this could actually be negative for the city of Liverpool, not even to the football club, for the city of Liverpool. Let's acknowledge the status quo is actually a negative for the city, in terms of what could well be a negative for the city of Liverpool if, for instance, the agreements were done more like La Liga. And I think that that's something which, I think that resonates right the way through football. I think there's other examples of it, but I think that a lot of the time where we've ended up and we act as though, as I say, the current now is or lots of people act as though the current now is the best possible version of events, we miss those bits out. So yeah, to the original question, but I think it's much grander than just that. There is the alternative of Liverpool bumping along for 4 or 5 seasons in ninth is, verges on unbearable and inhibitive for a city. But I also think that not in the same way that with Manchester United, really, though United back then certainly were and still remain, because they've been dreadful for so long, so commercially robust, that you've got stuff that sort of insulates you, but also means that at any given time, if Klopp hadn't have happened, someone else happens, it doesn't go as well. To go back to the point earlier on, Liverpool's just not that far from turning the corner, because the money and the potential is always there and can be made to be brought to bear. And then from there, the same way that at some point Manchester United will just sort it out to a degree, maybe not to the degree that they once did, but to a degree, and will not be anywhere near as laughable. At some point that changes. I mean, Jesus, it's got to. We're all enjoying it at the minute while it doesn't, but at some point it changes. And then from there, if they get it right, they can build and build and build. If ultimately in 10 years' time, people are hailing Radcliffe as a success, I'm immediately sceptical, because I would say that he's probably at best just got to par, but it will feel like a success because of everything that's gone on in the period of time. And there's a similar thing for Liverpool. So it would have got there eventually anyway, but it has obviously been important for so many facets of the city, the club, things that are connected, such as what you and I do, what Red Men do, what Boss do, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, just to expand on that with a bit more context, it's like, for us anyway, before Klopp, we were very much a voluntary organisation, and I think you were as well, but you might have been a bit further ahead than us because you were around about a year before us. But it was, for me, I never envisaged that there would come a time where we could be providing jobs for people, we could be providing livings for ourselves, doing this full time. It never seemed like it never even started it. I don't know if when you started the Anfield Wrap, you thought that could transform into a business. I certainly didn't with what we were doing, but obviously it did. And commercially, there's now enough revenue to provide jobs for people, and it's an ongoing thing. It's proved to be sustainable. Did you ever see that being something that could happen? And I think Jürgen Klopp, I very much think he was the catalyst to that for us.
But so I didn't start the Anfield Wrap. It was Gareth and Andy, and they worked with Jim and Ian. So just to be really clear, but they brought me in 2015, 2014, the autumn of 2014. Ultimately, we'd hit a little bit of a wall, so I just sort of said, let's just give them more podcasts. They like the podcast, let's just give them more. So we launched the subscription service on the 1st of March 2015, so it was 6 months before Klopp came in. and we had the pay aspect of it set up by the end of April. It was actually the Monday after they got beaten in the FA Cup semi-final by Aston Villa with our unerring sense of timing. They, a good number of people, sort of day one, day two, came through, and that made me think, hang on, there's something sustainable in this. Not necessarily to the point of being able to have 13 people work full time on it, which is where we are now. And I didn't think that day or immediately thereafter, but it did sort of make me think it comes from there. But then, there's another rash of subscriptions the day that Rodgers leaves, and then another rash of subscriptions the day that Klopp comes in. And the key thing that has always helped is winning. It's winning. It's what people then want more of what you do, because they want to enjoy the positivity of it. I haven't had to suffer the idea of what's it like if they lose 13 consecutive games, and I've got no interest in that universe ever happening. But no, winning is the most important thing. I think it's what gets people going. But they also want to feel on a journey with it as well, and that's what Jürgen offered. So I do think it does have huge significance. But then this is back to this idea that Jürgen didn't create those situations; he just transformed them. It already existed. The potential for it already existed. The potential was there in so many different ways and so many different facets. But he just transformed that moment. And if you were able to be part, therefore, of that process and doing good work, then you could see that happen positively.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you structured the book around these 19 key games that defined Klopp's time at Liverpool. And I'm curious, how did you choose which games made the cut? I mean, were there pivotal moments or games you attempted to include but ultimately had to leave out?
Yeah, a little bit of that. There was a little bit of back and forth. Ultimately, I had the sort of a bedrock of about 12 that were non-negotiable.
12, wow, you did well to get 12.
Yeah, the 12 that were just non-negotiable, and then it was, right, what aspect of the story does this add, to the idea of what went on in the period. So then you end up adding things like the 3-3 against Leicester in the League Cup where we win on penalties, where you go, there's strong colour to this for this season because we go on and win that competition, but also because it's a good example of something that you occasionally get supporting Liverpool, and I'd say any football club really, but you got a bit more of with Klopp, which is games that you felt would be a bit of a shrug of the shoulders suddenly become the most important thing that's ever happened to you, and you're not quite sure what the transformational moment was in that game, but suddenly this means everything. So sort of ones that can illustrate that a little bit. Ones that could illustrate what he did have to change a tiny little bit in there as well, pushing all the way through the full 19 of them, and working that out. I think was there was stuff at the end of the season a couple of times. I use a Wolves one, which was in no way, shape or form a great game, but he just says something quite fascinating afterwards, where he when he's interviewed about his experiences of coming second, that he's very good at coming second. He's come second a lot. So yeah, there wasn't a sort of the thought process was, what do we absolutely have to include, and then what gives us sort of that little bit more oomph around it all the way through. So for instance, the stuff with Manchester City, the 4-3, and what that meant and how that went, but then the offset of that with the Shrewsbury game. There's not a single one of them which is a Merseyside derby. Even though the Merseyside derby comes up over and over again through the timeline. But that was in part because the only one I'd have considered including would have been the pandemic game at Goodison when Van Dijk gets injured and Thiago gets injured. I kicked that around. That was the only game I was considering including during the pandemic season. But my ultimate sort of artistic, for want of a better word, conclusion was, because there was no one at those games, they don't count. They almost just don't count. So I nearly, and the Alisson header one, so I kicked those two around about including them, and just thought ultimately the argument, and I stand by it, is that games which aren't attended by people just cease to sort of be. It's football in a laboratory. It's not real football. But I kicked those two around. But yeah, there's no Merseyside derby in there. There's only one game against Manchester United in there. There's when we get beat 3-0 by Brighton in there, which isn't meant to be a sort of a battle of laughs. There's a lot more Wolverhampton Wanderers than one would expect in there. So yeah, it's an unconventional list, but it's a list which I think different people could have their own key games. But it's one that I like because I think it's one which tells tells us what was going on and what was being and what was about to be. As much as what was. I mean, I didn't really want to use this language. What was transforming the moments into things a little bit is how I've selected them.
Very good. Now, you've already touched on this briefly with the Everton point that you made, but Klopp's influence clearly extends beyond football, and that's one of the things that you were adamant you were going to cover in this book. As you said, it's not an autobiography by any stretch. Now, Transformer touches on that throughout. It's clear from everything that I've heard and seen about the book that's the objective here. Now, Klopp famously spoke out on political and social issues as well, from Brexit to the pandemic, and what made you think that Klopp became such a relatable figure beyond sport? And particularly, let's focus on the city of Liverpool now. I know what you've said about the Everton. Obviously, there was the freedom of the city that came last year as well. So that shows that it's not just half a city, because that wouldn't happen otherwise.
No, it's not just half a city. But I think it's, firstly, let's be clear. One of the main things that happens that adds to this is that he wins. It's really important to not get too hung up on. Klopp could have been having the best possible message on LGBT issues, but if Liverpool were coming 11th, no one would have listened. And that's wrong, but it's also just real and it's true. You have to win. So if we think about Klopp and the way he would speak about other matters and the way the nation took to him, it almost only really kicks in from around the spring of 2018, which is when
he started winning.
They start to win big games. They put themselves in a position to be in big games, and they started to win them. So he does one particular extended interview in the run-up to I think he does one interview with Donald McRae in The Guardian, he does another one with Channel 4 in the run-up to the final in Kyiv. And he's asked lots of questions, and he just is himself, and he gives his answers, and people immediately, because there wasn't much like him out there, he because of his inherent charisma, because of the nature of him, but also because of the way in which he speaks and where he admits he doesn't know much about this, and he likes to listen to experts and all this sort of stuff, which a lot of people who were prominent figures in the country just weren't saying then, and a fair few of them still aren't saying now. He immediately resonated, and then from there, I think that grew into the idea of the way we perceive him when we get to 2024, when we get to as we sit here now. But he was still similar to that person prior to that point. I don't think he's always necessarily the same person. I think he changes through the period as well. But also the opportunity to do it, or the idea that he's going to be listened to isn't there. But then also the nation wanting more of it. And I think that's the most interesting thing is the extent to which the wider nation just wanted more of Jürgen, not just Liverpool supporters. I think that if you're very online, you end up thinking this man was despised by supporters of other clubs, because supporters of other clubs who were very online as well are desperate to act as though they did. And some of them undoubtedly do, and some of them don't. But the wider nation like to hear from Jürgen Klopp. It's true, it's as simple as they wants to hear Jürgen Klopp's voice. Jürgen Klopp is constantly clipped on press conferences, on radio bulletins, to end a radio bulletin because they wanted to hear his voice. It is not, it is not that much more sort of dramatic than that. He, in a way, if we stop to actually think about it, if you want to say in 2020, he's arguably the most prominent European figure in the country. He just is. And that's, if anything, is a bit of an insult to a bit of an indictment, more accurately, to this country's relationship with Europe. But then a lot of this country's main relationship with Europe is actually being through the prism of football. It's worth pointing that out as well, and it should be better. Or should have been better and should be better, but the truth of it is that's where we are. So the day he stands down, the day it's front page news, it's the top story, and that sort of caught me a little bit unaware, really. Not thinking he's this heavyweight or anything like that. Not so much that, just more stopping then to think about the way in which he's perceived by the rest of the country is important, and then within that, therefore, how we should or shouldn't view the way the rest of the country actually perceives Liverpool. I think, and I think that he was inherently very, very good for that. But again, in the context of all of this, you have to win the games.
And amazing how fresh he's looking from in these pictures of it. He does, doesn't he? He's transformed.
He looks phenomenal.
Now, just one more, and I'm going to close off on your book tour. We were speaking off air at the start about how tired you must be, since you've kind of been to the four corners of the UK. You did Edinburgh up near me, and you've been to London, you've done Liverpool, you've done Belfast, and imagine you've had a chance now to engage with many fans who have either bought Transformer, who have started reading it, or some obviously you've had pre-release that have managed to complete it. How have the audience reacted to the insights you've shared on stage, for example, about Klopp's impact? And has anything surprised you about the responses during the events or the feedback you received since?
I think the surprising thing is a lot of people came, which was really, really nice, given the fact that it was also a week whilst games were on. I think in general, there's real warmth to him, but I think, and listen, again, I'll say it again, winning helps. I think one of the things that I've enjoyed about the events is that there's not been a real sense of pining for him. There's been instead a sense of celebration. And then the conversations that have been had, and I think it helps that he goes away, he looks great. He goes and, goes to Taylor, goes to the Paralympics. People are getting to see him at places and see him enjoy it. I think that helps. But I think, obviously, if Slot had come in and only won 2 of his first 6 league games, then people would feel quite differently. The events would have felt quite differently, but winning helps. So I think that there is currently a real sense of being able to celebrate what he did. Also, to view him as a human and not just as, I think it's very important not to sort of turn him into a myth, almost like a myth. We've got to remember that he didn't always pick the right team. You've got to remember the times when he did your head in. You've got to remember that, there was a lot of people who didn't like some of his choices. Liverpool supporters who liked his successes but didn't like his choices, and that's absolutely fine, I hasten to add. Like, there's no one way to do this. There's no one way to... There's Jürgen's way, and he talks about that a little bit in a couple of the events he does after he's left. Like, this is the only way I could see to do it. But he himself doesn't say, well, there is only my way to be successful. That's not true. So I think that's been, for me, that's been the best thing. And not the mildly surprising things. I think people are smart, but I think it could have gone the other way. If Slot doesn't start well, it could have gone the other way. And it's worth sort of being happy about that. And I'm wanting that to continue. The last thing we want is for there to be any point in the next 3 years where people are saying, well, we could really do getting someone like Jürgen Klopp back. That would be, but also that would be his failure. He would see that as his failure as well. He wouldn't just see it as Liverpool's or ours. He'd see it as his. So I think that was, the most important thing. The events were great. Everyone was excellent. Really enjoyed them all the way through. Really, people were good and nice and kind about the book. People who've read the book tend to, no one's. I don't know. Would someone message you and say, "Yeah, I'm not sure"? It would feel rude, but it's had lots of nice feedback from people that who I like. I like it more than I thought I would. There was a point around late April where I thought, you've just got to get this written. You're going to hate it. You'll need to get out the other side.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. It's just a part. I'm sure everyone feels a bit like that from time to time. But speaking to a couple of other people who finished books, I spoke to one football author who sort of said to me he reread something he wrote in 2018 recently and was like, Christ, this is good. Whereas his recollection of it being that this is not fun. This is not very good, really, ultimately. So I think just getting a teeny little bit of distance even has helped me appreciate it a little bit more. I'm not entirely sure when I wrote it. I genuinely don't know quite when it happened. Maybe it was someone else, and they just sort of came in and did it overnight while I slept. So yeah, no, it is. It's been good. It's been positive. The book is, we'll find out today where it's charted. It might not make the top 10, unfortunately, because it's the period of the year when it begins to all pop for people buying things for Christmas. But we know it's sold well. The publisher's really happy, which is nice, in that it's nice to work with people, new people, and then they come away and they've enjoyed the process of working with us as well in different ways. So no, all positive about it, really, all positivity. But as I say, it would all be a little bit different if Liverpool weren't doing well.
I know you had a bit of an insight in. I was fascinated actually to hear you talking about it pre-release, about all the different things people could do, whether they be in the UK or outside the UK, to help grow the book and chart it well. I'd never even been aware that was a thing.
You don't have to sell that many, but you begin to need to when you get into October, basically. So as late September, early October is the Christmas market. Cookbooks come out in the non-fiction space. All of these bits and pieces. I'm not quite sure. I've tried not to pay attention to who our enemies are. In terms of getting up the charts at this point. But also, I think it will have a shelf life that sort of leads into Christmas and beyond. I am, and the publisher is optimistic about it. So, if people are listening to this and they haven't bought it yet, as I say, I do think it is legitimately good. I would be a lot more shamefaced about it if I didn't.
Well, let's hope you can do a number on Delia or Nigella, and we'll see you. We'll see you in those charts. Neil, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on Anfield Index today. Congratulations once again on Transformer. It's clear the book is going to resonate with Liverpool fans everywhere, offering a deeper reflection, obviously, on Klopp's transformative years at the club. And Jamie Carragher, I saw on one of the headers, said it's a must-read for all Reds, so I think we should all pay attention to that. Transformer is out now. I'm busy listening to the audio version right here. It'll be on my next dog walk at lunchtime. It's available in all the usual places where books are sold, including hardback, Kindle, and the audio format. And as we said at the start, Neil is reading that audiobook himself, which I suppose we expect nothing less, considering it's Neil Atkinson. Most authors do not give you that privilege, I can assure you, as someone who listens to a lot of audiobooks. We wish you all the best with the success of the book, and I, for one, am very much looking forward to continue reading it. Thanks again for joining us, and until next time, up the Reds.
Brilliant stuff, Eddie. Thank you very much.